Welcome, welcome, folks. Chief Meteorologist Tim Pandajis here with you. Monday, June the 30th, 2025. Hard to believe. It's already the end of June. Tomorrow starts July. And then, of course, we get a little more active as we get deeper into the hurricane season. Tonight on HHL, we are 1/6 of the way through hurricane season. Yeah, it goes June 1st all the way to November 30th. And we got through June pretty quiet, although within the last week, of course, we had two named storms, both of which were very, very short-lived. And we're also going to be talking about the potential of some development in the northeast Gulf, maybe the southwest Atlantic. I'll show you that right now. Look, chances are very low of that happening, but it's something to keep a close eye on. Let's look back here on tropical season climatology in the Atlantic basin. Of course, things ramp up as we get deeper into the season. June is typically rather quiet. We start to see a marked increase in activity as we hit August. And then certainly the peak of the season, right around September the 10th, is when it's a little bit more likely to have activity out in the Atlantic basin. Then, of course, it starts to go downwards as we get towards the end of the hurricane season in November and through the end of November. But when we spread out the activity overall, the percentage of storm development per month, you see that the front and the back of the season are usually the least active. 6% of all named storms happen in June, compared with only 5% of named storms happening in November. And look at this, a third of the storms are found in September. Of course, that makes sense as it's the peak of the month and really ramps up into August as well. That's when we see the majority of our hurricanes and our major hurricanes, as overall the environmental conditions are just much more favorable by that point in time, coinciding with the peak of the season. So hurricane season so far, again, we're 1/6 of the way through of our 6-month season. So here's where we stand. Two named storms. We had Andrea and Barry. On average, for the first month of the season, you see typically around one named storm. We're going to revisit the climatology, the dates of the first named storms and the second name, so on and so forth. But introducing a new kind of metric here. Well, it's not really new, but it's first time we're talking about it. It's called the ACE, Accumulated Cyclone Energy. And that's kind of a different parameter we use to judge the intensity of a hurricane season. And then with that metric, you can see we've only got 0.6 of a point with two named storms. Typically, we get about 2.5 points of ACE in the first month of hurricane season. So first, what is ACE? Accumulated Cyclone Energy. It's an acronym. We love acronyms in the scientific community, right? Now, this quantifies the total energy released by all tropical storms and hurricanes during a season. It's not just the number of storms. So we could have 5, 6, 7, 8 storms, but have an ACE score of only 10, which would be very, very low. Sometimes you could have one single storm that accumulates an ACE score of 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, even higher from there. If it's a major, long-lived hurricane, it's releasing a lot of energy into the environmental atmosphere. So we use that. We'll visit that here and again during the season if it's necessary to talk about it a little bit more. But of course, we go from the number of storms we have as well, and we pluck those from a list of names that kind of recycles itself every 6 years. So there are 6 lists. We're going off the 2019 list, so we're revisiting that. There were some storm names that were retired and replaced. So now we're on to Andrea, Barry, and up next possibly would be Chantal. Well, will be the next named storm when we get it, but it may be developing in the northeast Gulf here. Then, of course, onwards from there. 21 names overall. If we run out of names, which we did in 2020, we went on to the Greek alphabet then. We just don't use the Greek alphabet anymore. We have a supplemental list of names, another 21 names that we'll pull from if necessary. That doesn't change. That's the same every year. All right, so here's a look at our two storms so far this season. Andrea in the North Atlantic, well northeast of Bermuda, was a named storm for I think it was 16 hours. It was nothing burger, really. I mean, it did not affect anybody. Of course, shipping channels across the Atlantic may had to alter their routes a little bit for rougher seas, but overall, nothing to write home about. And then this past weekend, we had an an investigative. We've visited that before. Investigative, it was 91L. That was in the far western Caribbean. It was starting to get its act together across the Yucatan. Hurricane Hunter aircraft out of Keesler Air Force Base went and investigated it, and they found it was organized enough to get a name. So it went from very low chances to blossoming and became Barry, roughly 12 hours ahead of making landfall in eastern Mexico. Now, is also a very weak system and was only named for, I think, less than 12 hours as well. So both systems short-lived, weak systems. And that's not unusual for this point in the season. Overall conditions are not all that conducive or favorable for development here. And if they find a pocket of favorability, they're very small. And these two storms did find that, and they were briefly around. So typically we find the first named storm around June the 20th. And I want to say that Andrea formed like 3 days after that. So we were roughly near that. But usually then you have to wait until the middle of July to get your second named storm. We've already achieved that, and we're still in June. So we're ahead of schedule here in terms of overall climatology. And then on August the 3rd, we would get our third name, the 15th, the 4th, and the 22nd would be the 5th. Notice that these blocks of time get closer together as you get deeper into the season, as activity becomes a little bit more numerous. So out in the Atlantic Basin now, still fairly inactive, fairly benign. Now, real lack of any convection out here. You don't see a whole lot going on. This is the intertropical convergence zone here. And as we get deeper into the season, this begins to lift its way to the north and can seed some storms. Of course, tropical waves coming off the coast of Africa, African easterly waves are also seeds for the main development region to foster growth. But the lack of any convection is a telltale sign that we're still dealing with a lot of Sahara dust. Look at this plume that's right about to come off, or has already come off the coast of Africa and is building off to the west. So likely we won't see much going on here in this particular portion of the Atlantic Basin for quite some time. Now, as we get into the middle to end of July, typically what's happened in the past is the dust will begin to wane or even just lift its way farther to the north, opening up the channel here for development in the main development region. Now, why we always talk about this area is because this is usually where our long-lived, strongest and most intense storms take shape. It's not the only area. We've seen several big storms come out of the Gulf and the Caribbean, but this is where the long-lived systems are from. You go back to 2017, we had a lot of main development region systems that proved to be very devastating as they made landfall in the Caribbean and the U.S. All right, so here's the area we'll be watching. This is the only active area of interest in the Atlantic Basin at this time. And it's shaded yellow. We call this a lemon because it's got a low chance of developing. In the short term, nothing. 0% chance. But within 7 days, small chance, 20%. Now, what's happening here? You can see this broad spin right over Florida pretty much, and really a big area of disturbed weather in the Northeast Gulf. Plenty of thunderstorms, squalls, a lot of rain in Florida today and along the Panhandle into southern Georgia as well. Now, what we're going to be anticipating here is a cold front that's actually going to be sweeping through the mid-Atlantic, bringing an end to this heat wave, which is welcome. But as that front dips south, sometimes that tail end dips south into a conducive environment, ocean area, and initiates some more spin. It can kind of give it a little nudge to foster some development here. So that could be what triggers this to kind of take on its shape. Right now, it's just kind of festering and sitting there. Once we get that front in here midweek, we'll see if that starts to kind of get things going there. But overall, it looks to be just a big rainmaker. It's still impactful. And of course, we're just a few days out from the 4th of July holiday weekend. A lot of beaches, as you know, on the west coast of Florida and along the Gulf Coast. So likely going to be interrupting that, likely looking at higher rip current risks, some swells, that kind of deal here. And you can see very squally, nothing very organized at this time, but we'll see if it takes shape. Waters are already very warm in the Northeast Gulf, certainly warm enough to foster tropical development if, in fact, we get that spin to tighten on up and organize. Regardless of if it gets a name or not, we're looking at a lot of rain. Models here, the GFS going right on through Saturday, shows several inches of rain here. Not a huge flooding concern, but certainly if you get some rain over the same area for a long duration of time, as we're seeing with this whole area just kind of sitting and spinning, we could see these totals higher. This is a general consensus on the model, showing 1 to 2, 2 to 3, maybe a couple areas seeing 4 inches of rain spread out through this week. So we can update our hurricane season scorecard. We're going to talk about the Pacific in a minute because we've got a new name out there as well. They're on their 6th name, but we do have 2 in the Atlantic, and that's Andrea and Barry, as we just talked about, both being low-grade tropical storms, but Flossie, well on its way to being the Eastern Pacific's 3rd hurricane. And here's how it looks on satellite imagery, okay? We are a higher-end tropical storm at this time, based on the latest advisory at 8 o'clock from the Hurricane Center, 65-mile-per-hour winds, and it's in the same general area, right? You'd think that with all the storms that have gone through there, there's been enough upwelling or mixing up of the ocean that we would be limiting, intensification. Doesn't seem to be the case. Just about 2 weeks ago now, almost, we had Hurricane Eric, major Hurricane Eric, that peaked at a Cat 4, made landfall as a major Category 3 near Acapulco. Now we've got Flossie right behind here that's looking pretty healthy. I've got a filter on here. This is infrared satellite imagery. And this filter is letting us kind of depict what the cloud top temperatures are and why that's important. I really like to use this filter, infrared satellite imagery in general, during hurricane season, because this kind of gives us an indication of how strong the storm is. So when we're looking at cold cloud tops, that's cloud tops that are accessing a higher elevation, higher altitude, colder temperatures the farther up you go. And that's indicated by the whites and pinks that you're seeing shaded there. That's convection that's very strong. It's rising to a high altitude, and it's tapping into colder cloud tops there. And we've got that kind of flaring up around the center of Flossie right now. So it's on its way, and it's forecast to become a hurricane here on the storm track off to the north and west. In fact, peaking as a Category 2 hurricane before it starts to encounter some colder ocean waters. And that will really bring down its intensification, weaken it quickly as it moves along the Baja California of Mexico, likely staying offshore, although the cone, the far northeastern portion, does move it over inland. But right now it looks to be trending and staying offshore, not taking a track that was similar to Eric just about 2 weeks ago. But again, it's the third hurricane so far this year. And as we've talked about before, usually when the Pacific is active, we don't see a very active Atlantic, and then vice versa. When the Atlantic finally turns on, we see the Eastern Pacific really quiet down, that also brings up an interesting point. Flossie was here a couple days ago while Barry was right there. Now, if we could go back and look at the satellite imagery, I didn't pull it up in time to show it on the stream, but Barry was heavily influenced by wind shear. And that was the exhaust or the outflow from Flossie, imparting wind shear from the west-southwest on it that was kind of displacing all the convection of Barry farther to the north and east away from its center. It was kind of interesting how Barry was even able to keep its act together and maintain itself as a tropical storm before it made landfall. But Flossie was definitely an influence. It would have been interesting to see if Flossie wasn't here, how Barry would have developed in the Bay of Campeche, the southern Gulf. I mean, conditions overall were still quite favorable. I mean, it was very, very warm ocean waters already at that time, so it probably could have been a little bit stronger if it didn't have Flossie there. And right behind it, we've got another area. Nothing here yet. This is still Flossie, but an area is likely to develop in the same general area here in the next 7 days. And it's got a low chance, but 30% chance, and this just kind of re-amplifies the fact that we've got still very active Eastern Pacific basin at this time. And the season there has been ongoing now for 6 weeks. Starts about 2 weeks earlier than the Atlantic basin because it becomes a little more favorable a little earlier. So May 15th is when the Eastern Pacific season begins, and it's proven to be a pretty active one already. We're already down to the 6th named storm. Again, Flossie right now at a tropical storm, likely to become a hurricane, but Eric was a Cat 4. And Barbara, a little earlier in the season, did make it up to a Category 1, and this is the list. It's different from the Atlantic basin, what we use for names, but this is the list out in the Eastern Pacific for this year. All right, folks, that's the latest here out in the Atlantic basin. I appreciate you joining us here on HHL. We do this every night, 8 o'clock, Monday through Friday. We'll be talking hurricanes, obviously, more and more as we get deeper into the season, and we'll continue to monitor what's going on in the Northeast Gulf and see how that may impact beachgoers in Florida for the upcoming holiday weekend. In the meantime, before we see you again tomorrow night, you can find me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok. Enjoy the rest of your Monday.